Thank you, Max. Recording in progress. Thank you. What an exciting morning. This is wonderful to see. Thank you, firstly, to the Safe Systems Solutions team for standing up this really exciting package of training. I'm Stuart Outhred. I'm the head of strategy and research with the Amy Gillett Foundation. This is Dan Knight.
G'day, I'm the CEO.
We have been working on this for quite a while, so that's why today is really exciting. We've built out a program. It's called the Safe Cycling Program. We've pitched it to the national government. They've funded it, and now we actually get to roll out things like training or upskilling for practitioners who do road design or are involved in planning. So really exciting to see so many months, years of work come to this moment. We've got a really exciting year ahead of this type of activity and a lot of other activity. So a lot of counsellor-facing upskilling, a lot of mapping. So the Bike Spot mapping program will go national later this year, and lots of other sort of engagement activities. So hopefully this is not the last you see of us. I just really wanted to drop in and say thank you for taking part. Make sure you get the most out of the next few sessions that you're involved with, because the guys delivering the training are the best in the country, and you're going to learn a lot. So be inquisitive, come at it with an open mind, and you will walk away with a really good appreciation of some best practice for people on bikes. So really exciting. Back to you, Max.
Oh, that's wonderful. Thank you, Stuart, and thank you, Dan. As you say, very exciting day for all of us, and eager to get straight into the content. I do want to start just by acknowledging country on which we are on today. So we are joined by people all over Australia, but the country that I'm on is Bunurong lands, and I'd like to pay my respect to the traditional custodians of that lands, as well as any members of First Nations people that may be present today. So welcome all. We're very excited to be running this. We do have a few little admin technical things to go through first, just to make sure that everyone's completely aware of what this course will entail and where to go and seek help and things like that. So I'll just get stuck into that. Looks like we may be still waiting on a few people. They might just be downloading the latest update of Zoom or something like that. So they might have to just catch up on this content. But the first thing I wanted to just mention is all of the sessions that we will be running will be recorded. We will be posting the recordings of these webinar sessions to our learning management system, our LMS. If you haven't received an email to join our LMS yet, or you haven't set up your accounts, please check your emails, check your junk, because it should have come through by now. That's where we host all of our training content. That's where you'll get access to these webinar recordings, as I mentioned, our quizzes, our assignments, all the extra resources that we mention within these courses are all housed here. So it's really important that we've got access to those tools. I'll hand over to Loretta to just do a quick little intro and say hello.
Hi, thank you. Thanks, Max. Hi, everyone. My name's Loretta Irado, training coordinator at Safe System Solutions. So I work, you may have received, a lot of emails from our team members, Marissa or Sam or Kathy. But yeah, we're training coordinators and we help in the back end. And I'll be moderating today alongside Catherine as well. In regards to the LMS, I will cover it a little bit later in the session, but just to kind of go over how to ask questions through the day, or through the session, I should say. We have quite a lot of participants on today. So if you, wanted to sort of make a comment, you can use the chat function. I can see a lot of you have introduced yourselves, which is great. Thank you. So using the chat function to, make comments, contribute to the conversation, with the group. But the Q&A is probably the best channel to use to actually ask a question. So if you can use the Q&A channel, and Catherine will be moderating that sort of channel, and we will answer those questions as best we can as well. And if you needed anything else, you can also just use that little raise your hand if you needed to get our attention. It is a webinar, so we can't see you and we can't hear you, hence why we've got that little raise hand if there was something really important that you needed to say out aloud, and we can allow you to talk if that's a thing. Yeah, I'm keeping an eye out on any emails in case anyone is struggling, in regards to the technical side of things with Zoom. But looks like, a lot of people are in there. But there is, in the email we sent, phone numbers. So if your Zoom fails for whatever reason, you can actually dial in and listen in on the webinar. It will be recorded, as Max mentioned earlier. So I'll upload that once it's ready, and it will be uploaded in the LMS by the end of the day. And that's it from me. Thanks, Max.
Thank you very much, Loretta. And I just wanted to make a little note in the chat function. There's a little to section. So you can either say to panelists and hosts, which means only we will see it, those on the screen at the moment, or you can do to all, just means that everyone will be able to see that. And we recommend just doing it to all, just in case anyone is interested in seeing that comment or question. That'd be fantastic. We've also got Ken Beer online, who I'm also will let do their own little biography.
Hi, well, welcome everybody. And I know quite a few of the people on there because they've done the road safety audit course with me or the safe system assessment course with me in person or online. And it's wonderful to see people back looking to skill up in some more specifics around cycling infrastructure safety. And so that's very exciting. I'll leave Max to do the bulk of the technical content. This is such a passion of his, cycling infrastructure and design that gets the best for those riding bikes. As many of you know, my background very much in the engineering of roads and to optimize safety and get the safest outcomes possible for all road users. And myself being a very active cyclist, I do a lot of thinking around making it safe for bikes as well. My contact details are on the screen there and were sent out as well. So please, get in contact outside this if you've got questions or you'd like to discuss different things. But I'll be in the background in the chat and pop your questions for Max in the Q&A. But let's have a bit of a chat behind the scenes because we don't have a lunch break to all have that discussion. So we're going to do it in the chat.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Ken. I'll do an introduction to myself as well. My name is Max McArdle, Senior Engineer or Engineering Operations Manager at Safe System Solutions. Always been really into cycling since I was a kid. I was lucky enough to be able to ride to school and both primary school and high school. So it kind of just became part of who I was, part of my identity since I was young. And then becoming an engineer, I was lucky enough to be able to turn that little hobby into something that I can actually practice and now actually teach as well, which is really fascinating. I think it's really important for communities to have safe cycling infrastructure and not be just dependent on motor vehicles. There's numerous research out there to suggest that cycling is better for the environment, for health, mental health, congestion, things like that. So lots and lots of wonderful positives to do with cycling. In terms of my background, I started at Vic Roads, where I was involved in the prioritization of $100 million safe cycling infrastructure fund and pedestrian. So just looking at different projects that we could fund with that fund of money from the TAC. And since all my career, I've been very heavily involved within the cycling space, and I'm regularly involved in providing LGAs and state governments policy and project advice on cycling infrastructure, and also run this course as well. So lots of exposure to cycling. And my other colleague, Catherine, I might let you also just do a quick hello.
Hi, everyone. Absolutely fantastic. 87 online. That's really incredible. So my name's Catherine Deedy. I'm the project development lead at Safe System Solutions. I've been part of the company for about three and a half years now, and my background has been in consultancy. I worked at Arup before Safe System Solutions, and I've also been in the local government space as well. Spent quite a lot of my career over in WA. So been in Victoria now for 6 years, and I'm very fortunate enough to live in the northeast part of the state. So Porpunka is my office. So lots of cycling around, lots of visitors that come to the area. It's something that I'm really passionate about. I'm into mountain biking, not very good at it, but you know, try and get out there. I get out on the road, not as much, I guess, because I'm not a super confident on-road cyclist, but I do appreciate the need for better infrastructure out there for us vulnerable road users. I've been super fortunate to be part of the TAC program, which funds vulnerable road users. So that's an amazing program that I've been part of for the last 3 years, and I really enjoy supporting local governments to get better infrastructure out there. So looking forward to the session. Hand back to you, Max.
Thank you so much. Okay, so that's all the introductions done. I've already touched on the learning management system. We will run a little session at the end where Loretta will just share a screen just to show you how all of that works. So I'll just pause that for the moment. To ensure that we've got maximum engagement for all our participants, we like to include this little fellow here that we call Wally the Wombat. Basically dotted throughout today's session, as well as session 3, you will see this little sign, okay? And it's your job to take a tally of how many times you spot Wally. This one is not included in the count, okay? So you're currently at 0, but you will see Wally pop up in the slides today. So make sure that you're not checking your emails or focused on other tasks or anything like that. Just hopefully get maximum engagement throughout today's session. We do have a minimum benchmark requirement to complete this course. So in order to achieve your certificate, we require attendance to all the webinars. And if you aren't able to actually attend, you know, just ensuring that you are watching the webinars via the LMS as mentioned. Satisfactory completion of our quizzes and assignments. There is also a little site visit as well. And we also have a minimum 80% pass mark on those tests. It's relatively high to get 80%. That's certainly much higher than what I was forced to achieve when I was doing university. But the reason being, you know, we're trying to ensure that all the technical content that we are sharing in these sessions is being transferred, and we feel comfortable in, you know, acknowledging that participants are learning new skills and are able to, you know, reference the technical guidance that we're mentioning and understand the principles that underpin safe cycling infrastructure. So, but there is a little caveat in that. If after the first attempt of a quiz or an assignment, you're not meeting that benchmark and you're uncertain as to why, please just reach out. You know, you can email training directly, or you can email myself. You can give me a call, and we're happy to go through those issues that you may be having. So we're happy to provide one-on-one coaching. If we have any participants that are failing up to the 3rd attempt, we consider that a failure on our part as training providers. So we want to make sure that, you know, you're passing as well. Okay, I'm going to launch the first poll for today. So Loretta, if you don't mind doing that,
Yeah.
shortly you'll see something pop up on your screen.
See that?
Thank you very much. Yep, that's just come up. And the question is, please rate your level of cycling infrastructure knowledge. And the choices you've got are very knowledgeable, aware but don't know much, not aware. I'll give you a moment to fill that in. And none of these polls that you may get in these sessions, they're not marked or anything like that. So don't worry about getting right or wrong answers here or anything. That's just to see what skill set we're working with and see how things progress over our course duration. I'm just going to move on for it, but feel free to work on that in the background. You can also move that little poll box around if you're working on multiple monitors. So if that's in the way, just get that out of the way. Today's session is all around off-road cycling infrastructure, so things like shared paths. We'll look at specific geometry requirements, so things like our path width, gradients, hazards, sideline issues, and fencing. We'll also talk about, well, what happens when a shared path crosses over a road? How do we manage that interaction with vehicles? We'll talk about bollards. And finally, we'll talk about where shared paths cross other shared paths, which is sometimes an afterthought within the design process, but it does hold a certain amount of importance to ensure that that's been adequately thought of. Okie dokie. So I've got a snapshot here of a shared path, or it's an off-road path, I should say, cycling network here. This is in Melbourne, just along kind of an esplanade district. So there's just water over there to the left. And it is a very, very busy commuter route. So lots of cyclists are riding through here to get to the city, to the CBD during peak hour, and then obviously leave the CBD during the afternoon as well, after work's completed. Very, very busy for cyclists. This is a very attractive route to be able to get in the city because you don't have to mix with traffic. You've got your own off-road facility. Because of those high cyclist volume numbers, what they've deliberately done here is they've allocated this space here where we can see the cyclists are riding at the moment. This is purely for cyclists. Pedestrians have access and their own network closer to the foreshore there, okay? So there's deliberate separation between cyclists there and pedestrians. So those two vulnerable road users aren't forced to share, like in a shared path. There's actually two separate facilities. Really, really relevant where you do have high volumes of both users, because as you can imagine, if you have ever cycled along shared paths, you know, it can get quite uncomfortable if it's very busy because you have to kind of weave in and out of traffic. And that could mean, you know, going into the opposing traffic lane. And if there's another cyclist in the other direction, things can get a little bit hairy. Or if people on the shared path are walking dogs and things like that, and the dog happens to, you know, walk out in front of you as you're cycling, those things can be a little bit stressful as well. So having this idea in your head that you can actually separate both pedestrians and cyclists, just like we separate cyclists from general traffic, is a really good principle to consider as part of your designs. We might end the poll there, Loretta, and we can just share it with everyone just so they can see the results. This figure here has been adapted, so taken from the Austroads Guide to Road Design Part 6A. You'll note that we regularly reference our sources for any figures or any principles or policies, just so you've got a reference so you can follow that up if you are interested in seeing that. But what this figure here is saying, along the y-axis, we've got number of pedestrians two-way per peak hour. And along the x-axis, number of cyclists two-way per peak hour. It's all just to do with volumes, okay? So how many pedestrians do you have? How many cyclists do you have? And if we look at, you know, the extents of both of them, you've got lots of pedestrians and you've got lots of cyclists. You'd be up in this category here, which is suggesting a 4-meter bike path and then a 4-meter footpath. So it's not suggesting a shared path. It's saying, let's separate those facilities because just with those quantities of vulnerable road users, it's not ideal to be mixing them. Where you do have lower volumes, you can see here a 3-meter shared path may be more appropriate. So this is a really useful figure to help set the scene if you are implementing new off-road infrastructure and trying to determine what that cross-section may look like. Another way that shared path width is often calculated is, you may have come across this. This is both within the Austroads design guides, and there's also a range of supplements for jurisdictions that recreate this. I should also point out that because we have multiple jurisdictions within this course, we're not just focused on Victoria or Queensland or Western Australia. We've had a look at the various supplements and additional guidance provided in each state, and we've just taken out snips from different jurisdictions. So you'll be able to see, I suppose, how different jurisdictions manage things and what we would consider best practice within that space. So you get to see how others are managing certain aspects of the network. Okay, path width. So a local access path, they've got this table here which suggests that a minimum width of 2 meters may be appropriate, but a typical maximum would be about 3 meters, and then desirable is 2.5 meters. And I just want to say that a 2 meter shared path, something that you can see in this photo here, is not really adequate for a shared path. I think that's well and truly below what is comfortable for cyclists and also for people walking or people in wheelchairs. You can even see these two people walking two abreast. There's just no space there for cyclists to be able to safely move around or travel comfortably there. And that, in combination with hazards really, really close to the edge of that shared path, it's not a great outcome at all. So certainly don't try and just aim for the minimums. We should be trying to get better outcomes than that. Loretta.
Oh, just a quick question in the chat. What is the definition of a regional path?
Good question. Let's give a prize out there, Loretta. So we also love to give out prizes. So if you ask a good question or you answer a question that I've got, you're a chance to win a prize. So thank you very much. So that got the ball rolling. The definitions here are provided in the Austroads Guide. However, it's not well defined at all. In fact, I would say the definition offers no real substantial truth or meaning behind it, and they are open to interpretation. So unfortunately, they're not much help. Regional path is kind of seen as something that does have commuter traffic, relatively higher volumes than a local access path. And a recreational path, the difference that I've seen between there is generally the adjacent land use may have things that would attract, parents, people with prams and things like that. So it's got a more diverse road user or vulnerable road users demographic within that space. So you could have playgrounds adjacent and things like that, or schools. That would be considered more recreational. A regional could be just not have those facilities. But as I said, the actual definitions are incredibly vague. But you can see like kind of the actual widths that they're talking about there is generally between 2 and 4 meters is what is being recommended. Just from experience, I'd say a 3 meter shared path would be pretty common, would be the norm. In more rural jurisdictions where you may not have the same quantity of vulnerable road users, you could be going down to 2.5, but anything lower than that, as I suggested, it's not a great outcome for any of the people using that space. So that was the width. I wanted to also just touch on the gradient, which is a real bugbear for me because I'm not a hills person at all. I will actively kick my routes to avoid hills, but an uphill gradient for cycling infrastructure. There is this graph here to suggest what is acceptable, which is in the dotted line, and what is desirable. And apologies for those that don't get stuck into this real nitty-gritty design detail. This may look a little bit confusing, but just to explain it in kind of layman's terms, along the y-axis, we've got our length of the gradient, so how long can we ride if it's at a certain slope or a certain steepness, and along the x-axis is that steepness or the gradient. And all that it's saying here is if you've got a gradient that's really, really steep, so the higher the gradient, the steeper it is, then you've got to make sure that the length is really, really low. So that's kind of what that curve is telling. That's what this graph illustrates. Just as an example, I'll just pick one. If you've got a 10% gradient here, what may be considered an acceptable length would be about 20 meters. So you don't want to be riding further than 20 meters at a gradient of 10%, because it's just not really achievable or attractive to the common cyclists. I will add a caveat there that there's plenty of hill seekers out there who will actually love to ride on 10% gradients, 15% gradients, and that's part of their training regime. But generally, if you're building shared paths, you're not really aiming for that particular cohort or demographic. You're aiming for any cyclist aged between 8 and 80. That's the general philosophy, general principle there. So that's all to do with the uphill design. If we also consider what happens when cyclists are traveling downhill. Okay, so this is an example of a pedestrian cyclist overpass traveling over this arterial road here. Got a question for the group, and I'm interested to see what will come out, because it's probably going to be a lot in the chat. So feel free to pop your answer in the chat. But what do you think could be considered a risk within this space to do with the way that this has been configured and considering the downhill grade? Okay, so imagine if you're a cyclist, you're about to start your journey here. What do you think the design team may have considered or should have considered to do with that gradient there? So pop your answers in the chat. I'll give you 30 seconds or so. I might need to open up the chat, just have a look. Okay, fantastic. I can see lots of, yep, maximum speed, absolutely. No signage give way. The conflict point right there at the bottom. Handrails on the fence, absolutely. Oh, Julian's on. Hello, Julian. All of those are spot on, I would agree. What I was kind of referring to is, yes, you've got this conflict point right at the kind of toe of the ramp. So basically that's where cyclists will be traveling their fastest. With just good old-fashioned gravity, you could kind of roll down that ramp and probably at speeds of 20, 25 kilometers per hour. So traveling relatively fast. And this conflict point is actually hidden behind this fence, this handrail fence. It's very, very difficult to be able to see that. So having the conflict point there where A, the visibility is restricted, and B, cyclists are traveling, at their kind of peak speed, is not a great outcome. We actually did an audit of this design, and we suggested, let's put the conflict point over here instead, where it's a lot clearer to see any other cyclists that may be traveling in that adjacent trail, and also provide that give way signage and things like that. And that has since been installed. So something to consider. The Austroads generally talks about the uphill grade, but also think about how cyclists are traveling in the downhill, and if there's any obstructions or anything of concern during that downhill transition. All right, when we talk about hazards on bicycle paths, first thing we consider is, well, what is an operating width of our cyclist? So we use a very nice and neat number of 1 meter. That's generally considered the operating width, and that is the same terminology that's used for vehicles as well as heavy vehicles. That operating width, how much space they require. Cyclists have their own operating width, so we use 1 meter. There is a little clause within Austroads which suggests if cyclists are traveling uphill, that operating width may actually be required to be widened. The reason being, cyclists traveling uphill, they tend to go like this, like they rock left and right, left and right, left and right. And that obviously increases that envelope. So whilst not specified just yet, I would expect in the next revision of Austroads and additional supplements that we may see changes to that operating width. But for the time being, this 1 meter width is generally taken as the standard or the norm. Importantly, we've got a head clearance that we need to be mindful of. So we obviously want to make sure that cyclists have adequate clearance if they're going under underpasses, for instance. They're not going to clip their heads. So the height of a cyclist is taken as 2.2, a 200 mil head clearance, which is not a lot. But often if you are working within underpass space, it can be a lot of money to be able to, dig further down or, ensure that the superstructure is higher. So you may be bound by what is currently there. But those are the figures that are currently provided. And the space in between the handlebars and a hazard. So a hazard could be a utility pole, it could be a fence, it could be a bollard, which I'll talk about later. Generally between 200 and 500 mil. 200 is really only used if that hazard is smooth and it can deflect a cyclist. So cycle-friendly fencing would be a perfect example of that. But a half meter is much more common. So generally the way that we would reference that or use that, within calculations or reviewing designs is if you've got a shared path, I might just draw an example of this here, a shared path here, and you've got the cyclists, traveling in these directions. Considering the operating widths and the cycling where the bicycle rider may be, you'd probably assume that would be cycling right in the middle, but they could be over to the left. The easiest kind of way is the edge of the shared path. And if you do a half meter offset from there, all of that should be free from any hazards. Okay, so there should be no utility poles or water drinking fountains or anything like that. So that's generally rule of thumb how that's managed. In terms of speed as well, this has been taken out of the Global Designing Cities initiative. We don't actually provide this resource on our LMS because we encourage you to actually download it yourself from their website. They like to track where certain people are downloading it from. So we didn't want to take that away from them and just provide it to you. So you can sign up, just pop your name, where you're from, and then you can download it. It's a really wonderful resource. It's like 600 meg or something like that. It's a really big file, but it's got basically all the latest research and best practice guidance for cycling infrastructure. And yeah, this particular figure that I took out of here, just generally what the travel speeds would be for different cyclists. Commuter, around 20. The term recreational cyclist, I would actually associate that more with slower cyclists, but they've used it for faster cyclists here. But anyway, generally as a rule of thumb, we tend to think of cyclists on a shared path. They may be riding between 20 and 30. Cyclists with families and things like that, or transporting goods, they would be between that 10 to 20 category. Some common hazards that we often see adjacent shared paths. So as I mentioned, that roadside furniture or cycle side furniture, whatever you'd like to call it. That example there is really one where you could have just flipped the the bin there around. So you could have had the pole there and then a nice little build out there for the bin. Would have been perhaps another way to mitigate that risk. Having little drop-offs adjacent a shared path is also quite common. The way that you'd mitigate that is you just want to ensure that whatever fill material you are using, you're battering all the way up to the surface level and not to the underside of the concrete shared path there. And the final example that I've got here is, this is just a utility pole that's actually very well hidden by the vegetation there. The edge of the shared path, it's a bit difficult to see, but it runs about there. It's definitely within that half meter clearance, which means this kind of does pose a risk for cyclists. Your handlebars could snag on that. And that is also accentuated as a risk due to that vegetation kind of having that masking effect or not having a clear visibility to that hazard. Loretta.
Thanks, Max. I've just got a couple of questions that have come through.
Go for it.
Are we beginning to consider wider operating widths for other types of active transport vehicles like trikes?
Yeah, it's a good question. So they're within the Global Design Cities Initiative that I mentioned. I'm almost certain it's in that research document. Hopefully I'm correct. There is a whole raft of different cyclist users. So yeah, the tricycle, cargo bikes, e-bikes, recumbent bicycles, things like that, and shows what their operating widths are and stuff like that. There has not been an update to that 1 meter operating width that I showed before. But I would expect, as we are now getting a more diverse range of, what constitute a bicycle and who's using those parts, that those operating widths may change. So good question.
Thank you. And one more. Does the minimum clearance also apply to curbs?
Good question. We do talk about curbs in our next module, and it would depend whether the curb is mountable or semi-mountable, or a barrier curb. Generally, no. I would say it wouldn't come into play. But if it was a barrier curb, and something that, if a cyclist were to lose their balance or become errant or something like that and is veering away from the path, and if they collided with a barrier curb, you could certainly say that would be a hazard concern. But generally, because they're so low to the ground, it's not as common to see that being picked up as hazard. But it's pretty valid to say that it's something that could be considered.
Thank you. I've just got one more.
Sure.
What is the volume on the paths that you are explaining, the clear zone, as only one showed another cyclist?
Oh, okay. So these are just typical. I couldn't actually tell you the exact volumes. I don't actually know where this photo was taken. This one is the Maribyrnong Creek Trail, as is this one actually. They're both on the same trail. You would have, hundreds of cyclists during peak hour, both directions. So they're both quite busy commuter routes into the city. So that example that I showed with the utility pole, here is an example of how it could potentially be mitigated as a risk. Okay, so they've actually used these little paddles to help delineate that there is a hazard here for the shared path. You can see that the shared path narrows in this section as well. That's also reinforced by the line marking there, just to show where the end of that path is and trying to demarcate that hazard a little bit better. Ultimately, if you are, doing these things, they should be all seen as like a supporting type of treatment. It doesn't remove the risk. It's just trying to make it a bit more pronounced. We should be really picking things up like this within our design stages, and instead being like, all right, I'm going to just move this hazard, further into the batter there. I'll have to build a little retaining wall, and then it just ensures that I can continue my shared path width all the way through. Then I don't have to worry about that at all, because whilst they do, a relatively good job at trying to delineate the hazard, it's a much better practice to remove that hazard altogether. Loretta, back for more.
Back for more questions. What is the minimum clearance required when the shared path situated at Vic Road's road shoulder or behind curb?
The minimum clearance from, sorry, do you mind repeating that?
Sure. So what is the minimum clearance required when the shared path situated at Vic Road's road shoulder or behind curb?
Okay, so it could be an example of this. So this is like a little shoulder here, and then the shared path belongs here. There are examples of there being, I would say 300 mil of clearance between there. basically the further you can put it away would be best practice, but I would say the 300 mil is the smallest I've seen. I'm not actually aware of a design saying that it has to be, or sorry, any design guidance or technical note that would suggest that it has to be X amounts. You just want to ensure that there is a degree of separation, which we talk about actually in our next module, whether it's a type of curb or some kind of concrete infill or a paddle or some type of separator to ensure that errant vehicles aren't going to stray into the shared paths space or any cycling facility there. All right, next I'll go into our sight lines. I like to just include these calculations to show that, cyclists get their own specific calculations. For those that have done any sightline calculations to do with, general traffic, like your stopping sight distance or your approach sight distance or all those kind of fun things. Well, cyclists have got their own as well, which is pretty jazzy. If you don't work within this space, please don't fret about all these numbers. It's nothing that you'll be tested on. It's just more for those that do actually do any of these calculations to be mindful of that cyclists have their own requirements. So very similar calculation to the previous sight line calcs that I mentioned, but you've got your stopping sight distance, speed, coefficient of friction, which generally you take worst case scenario. So you'd suggest that it's a wet condition, and then the grade of the path. And then you can do further calculations just to check if certain hazards on that path will be visible to a cyclist. And this has got to do with the horizontal sight lines, okay? But to show you what that means in practice, if a cyclist was traveling, there's the cyclist there, traveling on a shared path, and it's got this kind of bend in the shared path, and there may be some side obstructions. In this case, it's vegetation. You've got to do these calculations to ensure that if there was an object or a hazard situated on their travel path, that they have adequate sight distance to be able to safely slow down and maneuver around that and stop. Okay, so that's why that calculation is used for. So that's the horizontal sight line calculation. This is a real example of basically that scenario. So this, believe it or not, is a shared path, and that is sealed. It may look like gravel, but it is sealed. So you can, pick up relatively high speeds going around here. And because of this vegetation, you can imagine if something was, situated on the path there, you wouldn't be able to see it because of the vegetation. So a hazard could be a cyclist that's fallen down and they're blocking that path. It could be, I'm trying to struggle for any examples now, but yeah, it could be a branch that's fallen over the shared path. It could be a water hazard or something like that. But it's important that you're trying to ensure that cyclists are able to safely slow and stop and maneuver around any of those hazards that may be on their path. So in this instance, what was recommended is just trimming back our vegetation to open up our sight lines. Fencing. This one's a really interesting topic. There's once again specific tables to suggest when and where to implement fencing. And there's two kind of conditions for that. Our left-hand side is when we've got a vertical drop. Okay, so we're saying that there is some kind of vertical drop adjacent to the shared path. And the things that we're most concerned about is X, which is our distance from the edge of the shared path, and Y, which is the height of that drop. A fence is not required if X is less than 2 and Y is less than 250 mil. And you'll see that there is a little asterisk there. The reason being, if it's less than 2 and the Y is less than 250 mil, or 0.25, instead we want to be battering off the surface. So as I was saying before, just ensuring that your surrounding fill is used to batter up to that surface. So you've got like a nice smooth gradient there. That's a better outcome than putting in a fence, is what they're suggesting. There's also this talk of a partial barrier fence required if, you've got a drop between 250 mil to 2 meters, which is huge, and a full barrier fence, which is greater than 2 meters, which is like a really significant fall. I'll show you examples of what those partial and full barrier fence mean. In my personal opinion, I think it's overcomplicating things that they have these two separate categories, but this is what's currently within our guidance. So this is what we reference. The same kind of philosophy is also applied for batters adjacent the shared path. So once again, thinking of the steepness of the gradient or the adjacent land there. So the formula used is the 1 in Z, rise over run, that kind of idea, if you remember your year 8 mathematics. If it's a really shallow gradient, so it's quite easy to ride over, then don't worry about a fence at all. But as it becomes more and more steep, think of either a partial barrier fence or a full barrier fence. And the top image that I've got on this slide is a partial barrier fence. Okay. And the bottom image is our full barrier fence. The difference between the two is the full just has vertical members all the way through it. So it's physically impossible to be able to fit a cyclist through there. Theoretically, a cyclist could fit through there, particularly if they were, a young cyclist. As I said, I think this is overly complicated. But those are the two different thresholds that we use for our fencing. The most important thing that I would like you all to take out of this, though, is the smooth deflection rail that's shown on both of them. So you can see this rail here and this rail here. And it's also shown within the little cross-section view there. That is deliberately situated at a height where if a cyclist is on their bicycle, it's a height that is in between their wrist and their shoulder. So if a cyclist were, running off the path, it means that part of their body makes connection with the fence and not their handlebar. Because if their handlebar were to collide with those vertical members, that's a massive snagging risk, and cyclists are very likely to topple over and potentially fall over the fence as well. So instead, there's this smooth deflection rail, sometimes referred to as cycle-friendly fencing, to ensure that the person's upper arm or arm, makes contact with that. They're much more likely to be able to stay on their bicycle. All right, few different examples here now as well. So longitudinal fences with rounded posts and smooth railings, they get the tick, but anything that's kind of curving towards the cyclists or anything with sharp points, that's no, that's a cross there. Low fences as well. So often we can kind of forget about anything that's, lower to the ground, but the reason they're a concern is because they can actually strike a cyclist's pedal. And it's just another way that a cyclist may lose balance or come off their bicycle. So perfect example of something like this is you may have planter boxes that you've used adjacent a shared path, and they themselves may be treated as a hazard. So you want to ensure that you're providing adequate clearance to those planter boxes, so you don't have that hazard in place. All right, so I've done a lot of talking, so I'm also going to open up to another poll now, Loretta, if you don't mind.
Yeah.
While I get a drink of water. And this one is, should fencing be installed along the shared path? So this is a real shared path that we've got here. And I'll just draw it out so everyone's clear. Should we be doing a fence at this location? I'll give you 30 seconds to fill that one. Alrighty. Might just end the poll there, Loretta, and don't stress if you didn't get time for that. It's, as I said, you're not marked on this component, so it's just to get some live feedback. 99% are saying no, we wouldn't install a fence here. We did have 1% saying yes. That's a pretty common kind of reaction that we tend to get with this question. Generally, I would say no as well. You could go out and say, Max, I don't have enough information there. Like, how far is this, situated from the edge of the shared path? Because you told me before that we're after a 1/2 meter clearance, and if that's not a 1/2 meter clearance, then that's a hazard, and maybe we should be implementing a fence there to ensure that cyclists do not strike that. But generally, looking at the adjacent land within this particular example, you've got vegetation there. If a cyclist were to become errant, I can't see that there's going to be significant injury to a cyclist within this space. Certainly more concerned about any crossing points that you have with general traffic, which you can see above there. But thank you very much for joining in on that. I do actually just want to go back to the previous slide. I've got to mention one thing. Another example of this cycle-friendly fencing is, it's a little bit difficult to see in this photo, to be fair, but see how the sign post is situated in front of the fence? So as I said before, the reason that you include that smooth deflection rail is so that cyclists, they're colliding with the rail and not the fence or any snagging hazards. If a cyclist were to collide with the rail, they're basically being guided directly into this hazard. So that's a really poor outcome. So if you are doing any signage or anything else, just ensuring that sitting behind the fence so that cyclists do not collide with that one. I might take a pause there, Loretta, because we've gone through quite a bit of content, and I want to give people just a chance to, go out, have a stretch, get a cup of tea or a coffee or whatever you need, and we'll give it 5 minutes. So according to my clock, that will be 10:58, and then we can rejoin the session and get stuck into some more content. Does that sound good, Loretta?
Sounds good, and maybe some questions before we start back. See you soon.
Stretch and a bit of break. I'll just check in with Catherine and Loretta, see if I missed any questions.
I think we're all good now. Catherine's been keyboard warrior, which has been great.
Just to thank you. Tried lots of questions, which is fantastic. Love it. Just a question, Max, and I thought it was a good one to raise for the group and for you to have a go at answering. So guidance, it's around the fencing again. I think the fencing is quite a hot topic. Guidance from Queensland TMR is that fences with vertical bars have been identified as a potential risk to cyclists, especially on corners where cyclists could hit the fence at an angle. And this unfortunately came from a coroner's report on a death where the vertical bars were identified as a contributing factor. Is there any national safe systems research and guidance on this common type of fence design along cycleways that you know of, Max?
So I think the question in itself is also a bit of an answer, because the first resource I would have turned to is that TMR document, which is purely about cycling fencing, which is quite detailed. So that would be my first point of call, just to see what, research papers and reports and guidance documents they actually reference, because that is the most comprehensive document that I know of in relation to that space. You can also reach out to Michael Langdon from TMR, who would be more than happy to share any additional information that he may have within that space. But yeah, unfortunately, that's the only document I can think of at the top of my head.
All right. Thanks, Max.
No problem.
Yeah, and I believe that's everything at the moment, unless Loretta has anything I've missed.
No, all good. I guess I just wanted to make reference quickly to the polls. I know a few people messaged through saying they couldn't see the poll. Sorry, that's not really something that we can control. It might be based on sort of whether you're using the browser or the client, or if you need to upgrade maybe the Zoom. So sorry about that. Nothing we can sort of do.
Okay. Well, maybe for next session, for those having an issue, just try and download the latest version of Zoom. Hopefully that fixes it. Could just be a bug with the software that you're running, but we can also just put in any of the poll questions in the chat, just so you can have a look and you can answer the questions there as well for anyone struggling.
Sounds good. Thanks, Max.
That's okay. And did we hit the re-record button? Sorry.
Yes.
Yes.
Alrighty. So the next aspect of today's module, we'll be talking about where shared paths cross over roads. So ideal scenario is we've got all these wonderful off-road cycling networks, but inevitably, no matter what direction you go in, whichever direction you travel, you'll find a road. So we need to think about how we mitigate the risks associated with crossing over a road, particularly for cyclists. The reason being, cyclists are traveling at higher speeds than just pedestrians. A little bit more difficult for them to, stop in time if there is a motorist that's not yielding or giving way, or driving erratically or anything like that. So certainly something that should be considered for cyclists. When we think about what is considered best practice, well, actually, I should start with, if you were doing gold standard, you would do grade separation and not have any interaction with general traffic, but appreciate that's not always achievable, particularly in these examples that we've got up here. Maybe if you're crossing over a motorway, you would certainly expect grade separation, but not over just arterial roads or local networks. When we are looking at best practice for managing cycling connectivity across carriageways, we actually like to raise the crossing points. Okay, so we like to raise it, and we like to give priority to cyclists and also to pedestrians. If it's a shared path, then obviously pedestrians there as well. So you're giving priority to your vulnerable road users. So this one on the left is a photo taken within Victoria, where it is within Victorian jurisdictional supplements. It is practice to colour the conflict point yellow where it's a shared path, and also implement these supplementary signs which says give way to pedestrian symbol and to the bicycle symbol, just to make sure that it's clear that they're the ones with the priority there. The photo on the right-hand side here, this is from Brisbane up in Queensland. They've got a slightly different approach of signing and demarcating the area, but principle's the same. They've raised the shared path crossing and they're giving priority to vulnerable road users there. Now, I will open this one up to the chat and mention that my preferred crossing point out of these two examples is this one on the left. And anyone in the chat want to suggest why I would be circling the left-hand side one as my preferred design kind of configuration as opposed to the right-hand side? I'll give you, I might have been too quick on the previous one, so I'll give you a minute to this one to answer this one. All right. Love seeing all these answers coming through. Thanks very much. And I'm certainly seeing lots of similar answers, being the sight line which I certainly agree with. Few points there about the difference in the way that it's actually, set up with the signs and the coloured treatments. In a perfect world, absolutely, every state and jurisdiction would make sure that all of these look the exact same. I don't really think that there's a significant difference between, making this yellow or making that green or making that red. Happy to be answered, but I rebutted there. But just my opinion is, if it's coloured, it's coloured, and as long as it's consistent, that's the most important thing. But the answer that I was particularly looking at there was the sightline issue. So if you were a cyclist heading along this direction here and crossing over that raised point, very difficult for you to be able to see a motorist who would be over your back right hand shoulder there. And also, for a motorist that's actually traveling on the carriageway there, they may not necessarily expect that you're about to do this little S kind of shape in front of them. They may miss the cue of the give way there. I mean, I'm sure we've all experienced of vehicles failing to give way. We've all had that experience. It is sometimes there can be lots of other things happening in the car itself or outside the car that are distracting, and signs that just say give way can be missed. But the raised function of this design really helps to mitigate the risk of a collision, because what you're actually doing is you're forcing motorists to slow down. And in this instance, they are slowing down to a speed of 20 kilometers per hour or below, because that's what the kind of the ramp of the raised crossing point will comfortably allow a motorist. So ensuring that the speeds are low where there is a conflict point is just a big win for cyclist safety. So that's one of the main reasons that raising these crossing points are so attractive, because you're bringing down vehicle speeds. The other really attractive thing about this design is you're not forcing cyclists to, if you have to switch the priority where general traffic just have right of way and cyclists are forced to slow down and look left and right and then hop back on their bike and then ride through. It's very uncommon that cyclists will do that, because it's very uncomfortable to do. You don't really like to have to do that stop-start motion. It's much easier for a car to slow down, give way, and then drive on through, as opposed to a cyclist who actually has to engage with the mechanics of their body to be able to do that movement. So big win there is raising the crossing point to ensure that traffic speeds are lower. And the speed that we're generally looking at, and I'll probably mention this a few times in the duration of the course, is, let's see if I can just get a blank screen up actually. Excuse me, sorry, I'm just trying something new. Not that one. Sorry, Catherine, did you have a question?
Just while you're doing that, Max, I just thought I'd make a note of someone raising the point about the give way with the image on the right, and actually who does give way, because it looks quite confusing, doesn't it? Is it
true.
Is it the bicycles or is it the motorists? So I guess the angle of that give way is quite confusing. So
I wonder if that's deliberate, to maybe be like, don't take it for granted, cyclists, you may have to give way.
Yes.
I do believe it is for the motorists, just because you can see the give way line marking at the toe of the ramp there.
Yeah.
So I do believe that's for the motorists.
Yeah. But yes, always look out when you're on your bike.
Absolutely. So I think there's a whiteboard function on here. I'll investigate that, so I'll have that set up for the next one. But what I was going to show, I'll just have to do a little diagram of this, is just a graph here where along the y-axis, if I had the probability of a fatal accident occurring along the y, so that's from 0 to 100%, and then I had the collision collision speed along the x-axis from 0 to 100 kilometers per hour, whatever you'd like to do there. If I had this type of graph set up, the way that the curve looks is something like this. I may have dramatized that a little bit. But you can see roughly around this point here, things get exponentially worse for a cyclist's ability to, walk away from that accident or, not be killed. The speed of which that happens is 30 kilometers per hour. So when we are having any conflict points where a shared path is crossing over a carriageway, if we can manage speeds to 30 kilometers per hour or below of that vehicle, we're a much better chance of reducing the likelihood of a fatal cyclist crash occurring there. So that's kind of what we are aiming for. That should be underpinning our decision making, trying to bring speeds down to that 30 kilometer per hour mark or below where that conflict exists. And generally that's achieved by providing these raised platforms. This is actually what it looks like out on the ground. And you may notice that there seems to be a relatively high amount there of cyclist skid marks, potentially cyclists just slamming on the brakes at the last moment because they realize that the vehicle is actually heading straight on through. They're not yielding, they're not giving way. You've got all these examples there of that kind of activity there. So yeah, if you are able to provide crossing points perpendicular, where you're maximizing that sight distance, really great outcome. Appreciate for this particular site with the constraints that you're working with, it can be difficult to achieve that, but as a general rule of thumb, it's much easier for cyclists to be able to safely pass through those environments where they are perpendicular crossing points. Okay, some bollards now. So lots of different bollards that we have around our networks. And these are just a few select that I just wanted to include in the presentation. The one on the left here is actually in Byron Bay. Now, obviously the intent of bollards is to ensure that there's no vehicle egress. So vehicles can't access the shared path. Every now and then they're also installed to ensure that dirt bikes, motorbikes, those kind of things, kids with monkey bikes, that kind of thing, are used to deter their access. I've got a few, the kind of way that I think we should be referring to bollards is we are installing a hazard for cyclists on their network, okay? Picture that in the sense of if you were designing a dual lane carriageway, or you've got a traffic lane and you've just got to assume that at certain parts of the network, we're going to install these hazards in the middle of those traffic lanes. And that's just part of what we do. I really strongly encourage you to think about, is that what we should be doing? What is the level of risk associated with an errant vehicle, a vehicle accessing that shared path, versus what is the risk of a cyclist actually hitting that hazard and causing themselves damage? The one on the left, I kind of question a little bit as to why you need the middle bollard there as well, because that's an incredibly tight space for cyclists. You're not getting your half-meter clearance there that I mentioned before that you require for cyclists to be able to safely travel without any, free from any hazards there, because that's literally in the middle of their path of travel there. If you are installing bollards, ensuring that they are incredibly well delineated, so they're easy to see and not like what is shown like there in the middle photo, where it blends in really well with the surrounding bluestone pavers there. This is a bright sunny day, you can see them, but when it's a nice cloudy day in Melbourne and even if it's a little bit drizzly, they really disappear with the surrounding environment. So they're a terrible example of bollards. Definitely they were included for architectural reasons, but I think safety should also be one of the driving forces for these. And this is a really good example of where I think we could go without the bollard altogether, because there's no adjacent traffic stream there whatsoever. As far as I'm aware, the reason that they have been installed is so the rubbish collectors who do access this kind of area, or maintenance vehicles or things like that, they're not driving any further than this. But to me, that's such a small cohort. Would it not be easier to just ensure that whenever you've got those people doing those works, that you have this conversation, don't go past X points, because there's no way to turn around there safely, or we don't want you there for whatever reason, as opposed to putting in this, physical hazard that's there 24/7, or even like geofencing, so vehicles can't travel any further than that point there. I think we're all too ready to assume that bollards are part of the network when I don't think that they necessarily need to be there all of the time. So it's worth having that discussion as part of your networks. The banana bars, these ones on the right-hand side, they were very common in Brisbane and Queensland. You can see that they really pinch in cyclists there at the conflict points. Yeah, as far as I'm aware, these are completely redundant now, and they're actually being ripped out and replaced with other types of entry treatments. A few more bollards. Sorry, I've got lots of bollards. I see lots and lots, and I like to take photos of them. But timber bollards, once again, not incredibly easy to see. Chicanes. So this idea of actually slowing down cyclists through this kind of approach, and that would make it very, very difficult for vehicles to be able to enter that space. That can be a reasonable way to manage that risk. It's not uncommon to see this type of arrangement, though, where cyclists that have, longer operating areas, so think cargo bikes, or if you've got a bike and a trailer for your kids out the back, or you're shopping, or your dog out in the trailer at the back, whatever it is. Sometimes those chicane treatments can be too tight for them to actually maneuver. So that's something also to consider. This last example is in Tasmania, where you just got like this U type of bollard that's being used to prevent access. But once again, if you think of it more philosophically, this is literally a cyclist travel point, that direction there, going down the hill. And you've just placed a massive hazard right in the middle of their lane. So that would never happen in a traffic lane, but we're kind of willing to accept it for cyclists. So you might be questioning, well, what can we possibly do within this space instead? But before I get to that, I did want to just share and I suppose a reminder of why I'm talking about this. This is a bollard that was erected on the upfield bike path in Brunswick or Coburg, I think it was. Sorry, in Melbourne. And that's how it kind of looked. You can see it's certainly been struck many, many times, and doesn't do a great job of standing out, or just looks like it's been through the wars a little bit. This fellow here was unlucky enough to strike that on his commute home. So he rode into it as it was looking like that. He broke his wrist, broke his arm, 3 places, and had some facial injuries as well. While had to call an ambulance to come and get him, while waiting for the ambulance, he saw 2 other riders hit that same bollard. So within the space of 40 minutes or whatever it was. The 2 other cyclists had minor injuries. They never get reported. We know that cyclists' injuries, particularly with bollards and any of these hazards, are incredibly underreported. They don't know who to say, where the issue is, or they can't be bothered, so they just cycle off and that's it. They might have damage to their bike, they might have minor sprains or grazers or things like that, or potentially just a bruised ego. But it is a lot more common than you would expect. And then this fellow, he complained to council and decided to get his legal team involved and decided to say, you can't just be putting bollards in the middle of my path. That's wacky. So he's decided to sue council. Council went out the next couple of days and decided to give it a coat of paint and some fresh tape. But so it's certainly more visible, but the hazard still exists there. All right, so what can we do instead where we do have shared paths crossing roads? How can we prevent, vehicle access there? What I would consider a better outcome is, the way that I visualize this is, for those who are within the traffic engineering or road transport space, think of a splitter island. This is just a splitter island for cyclists. And instead of actually using a concrete, or curb arrangement, you could use that by all means, but you could also just use vegetation. So that would help, A, separate the two opposing streams. We've got egress going that way and access going that way. The vegetation itself would likely act as a deterrent for any vehicles to access that space. If it's kind of above 200 mil or, if it's high, then it's unlikely that vehicles would be able to drive over it. Perhaps they could, but what are the odds that they are actually going to do that? So I consider this as a much better way to mitigate the risk of vehicle access and not, provide just a big hazard at the end of shared path facilities. Here's a bit of an example, not exactly as it's shown on that little diagram before, but kind of what I'm referencing here, where you can see that vegetation or grass is used just to help provide a little bit of clearance to what is actually a hazard, which in this case are bollards. Yes, it would certainly ensure that motorists, it should help reduce the risk of motorists accessing that bridge over there. But the other really cool thing about this one is they're actually solar lit bollards. So there's solar panels on the top there, and then they light up at night, so it's visible during all light conditions. So yeah, just thinking about a broader range of issues there. The other thing I wanted to mention is DDA requirements. So although we're talking about shared paths, we're thinking about cyclists and how they're connecting across roads, it still is a requirement for any TGSIs, tactile ground surface indicators, to be installed on that shared path. So you still do need to adhere to your DDA, Disability Discrimination Act, just to ensure that people with vision impairments or the blinds are able to acknowledge that they're about to cross a carriageway. So you still need to provide that provision. And I've had cyclists and others involved in this course ask, what are the implications of cycling across the TGSI? So those that are not familiar with that, that's kind of like the little braille that's on the ground there. Anecdotally, personally, I've got no issue with cycling across those kind of things. I haven't really experienced any issues with skidding or anything like that. If it's like physically lifting because it's like a defect, that's a different question. But in terms of the material itself, I think it's not really an issue at all. But yeah, so I just wanted to remind everyone that the DDA Act is still relevant and should be considered as part of doing any of these shared paths. All right, another question for the group. So feel free to chuck this in the chat shortly, but where we've got examples of a shared path crossing a shared path, I'm going to ask you, what is wrong with this photo? So we've got this image here of a very confused looking cyclist What do you think is wrong with this photo? What do you think would make that cyclist confused at this point in time? Give you 30 seconds to have a think about that.
Where's this one again, Max?
This
Sorry,
one,
I'm interrupting your water break.
no, it's okay. I'm feeling parched. I'm very parched
Yes.
today. This one is, I can't remember the trail, what it is called.
Mary,
The
is it
reason I
near the
included it,
Merry Creek? It looks kind of similar to the Merry Creek Trail.
no, it's not Merry
No.
Creek. It's
No,
it's like near Epping,
got you.
up
Okay.
north. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, okay. Yeah, yeah.
But the reason I actually took this photo is because I experienced this cyclist frustration.
Yes.
So that confused cyclist was actually me.
No, I mean, look, it's pretty unclear, isn't it?
Hmm. All right,
We got some good answers coming through, that's for sure.
I'm just going to jump in here because I need to give out some prizes.
Oh, good.
I'm going to give a prize to Steve because Steve was the first one to answer this question and a previous question. So a prize for Steve.
Terrific. And have I missed any other questions along the way? I should just double check.
No, I think we're okay.
Well, we're good. Lots of discussion around bollards, so that's always an
Yes.
interesting one. Yeah,
It's very contentious. People
yeah,
tend to be one side or the other. But yeah, I think the most important part of it, as I mentioned, was just having a discussion around if it's actually required and then go
Yeah.
from there.
I think a lot of, when it comes to managing vehicle access and, ensuring hoons or, just general traffic don't get confused where they can and can't go. So, yeah, why do you need the bollards and then sort of work back from there? I think that's a good strategy because I know I've certainly seen a lot of bollards which are treatments probably from 10, 15, 20 years ago, and it just doesn't make sense anymore to have them out on the network. So
Yeah.
Yeah.
It just seemed to be put there just because, yeah.
Yeah.
All right. I'll just quickly summarize some of the comments that I'm getting there. Yeah, we've got like the 1950s Y intersection. Good, well spotted. But yeah, a lot of that question around there's no clear priority and there's no wayfinding signage. So both of those are the answers that I was kind of looking for. I'll get rid of that cyclist there. I'll just do a little diagram about the priority in case that's not clear, but obviously if you're a cyclist and you wanted to turn right at this instance here, and if you're another cyclist coming through this direction, who gives way to who? It's not clear at all. There's nothing there that would suggest one leg is, the main thoroughfare and the other needs to yield. So you certainly want to step away from any of that possible priority confusion. Good way to obviously do that, or the easiest way would be to assign one of the legs as the thoroughfare. So I'll just say this one is where most of cycling traffic are going, which means we can put a little give way hold line here, and we can put a little give way sign here, obviously facing that direction. So cyclists that are traveling here, they see the sign, they know to give way before accessing the adjacent shared path. So as suggested in the chat, ensuring that the priority is clear. Catherine.
And just for a bit more context, the two paths that we see in the photo, do they connect to the same path?
I see. This is the reason I think that they did. Yeah. So the other note that I was going to make is just about the wayfinding signage.
Yeah.
Which would have been great to have a sign here to say left takes you to wherever and right takes you to whether, because this is literally where I had to stop and get out my phone and check which leg went where,
Sure.
which is really frustrating. So that was the other kind of point that I was getting to there. From memory, though, I do believe that they kind of did link to other shared paths. They crossed over a road there. Or maybe that one crossed over a road and this one just went another direction. I'm not too sure. I can't remember.
Thanks, Max.
No, no worries. But this wayfinding signage, it is often an afterthought when you're going through the design process. And, you know, it really does improve the attractiveness of a facility, just makes it more connected, easier for cyclists to experience that. It's so important that Austroads actually released, you know, an entire research report to bicycle wayfinding, because so many jurisdictions do this different ways, and not just state jurisdictions, but individual LGAs may have their own way of mapping out their cycling routes. Once again, I'm personally a fan of, we're kind of one country. Ideally would be, no matter where you are, you'd be seeing similar signs and similar fonts and similar colors and all those kind of things, but we're certainly not there at a national level. I'd like to see that at least at a state level. That would be fantastic. But some general principles that you can glean out of this document would be, wherever you are along the routes, the signage should be consistent. So you aren't, you know, even if you were crossing over LGA boundaries, you would like to think that if you're on a particular trail that's meandering along a creek or something like that, the way that information is communicated to cyclists is consistent. So same colors, same fonts. If you're using, for instance, a number, this is number 15 trail. The number 15 trail goes from the train station all the way to the Esplanade or something like that. Then all junctions have that number 15, and it says left to the Esplanade, right to the library. Having that consistency all the way through just gives cyclists confidence that they're, you know, on the right route, and they're not going to be, you know, end up somewhere where they didn't expect or anything like that. So it can sound quite minor and trivial, but it can actually make the difference between, you know, a really comfortable ride and something where you're not really sure if you're going in the right direction. Another really common thing, relatively common, depending on which jurisdiction that you're working with, but if you are working in a shared path adjacent a creek or wetlands, flood-prone area, there may be times where that shared path is inaccessible. Okay. Obviously, perfect world, we would have a shared path that's, you know, well and truly away from any of those flood areas, and you don't need to worry about these kind of things. But generally, you know, we have to live in the real world as well, and there are instances where there may be water inundation, making the paths inaccessible. Okay, so you could have path closed fences already along your network where they either automatically or someone comes out and closes those, so cyclists are aware that, you know, this is closed off. There's a path near where I used to live where this kind of happened somewhat regularly. I would say, I don't know, half a dozen times a year, where the path would be closed. Cyclists would still try to cycle through every now and then, just because the water had risen so much and the shared path was underwater. But the reason I'm talking about this is because that's another instance where this wayfinding can be really, really useful. Because if you are aware of any of your parts of network that experience, you know, those type of issues, you can implement a signing scheme where there is higher ground, right? And say, this is the detour that you would need to take if this shared path is closed. So you can even do it, as I said before, if you are using fences to physically close off access to shared paths, you can put a sign on the fence itself to say, you know, this is closed, but the detour is just go back along there and head along this way, and then you can cross over a bridge to get it over that water and then back onto the trail there. Really, really cool to be able to do that, because once again, you don't really want cyclists who are used to just riding this route to get stuck at a certain point because they're unable to continue. They've got a clear method in place to continue their journey, and it's already been provided for them. It's a much more comfortable experience. Loretta.
Thank you. Just a question here. Are the laws going to change to force cyclists to use shared paths and off-road cycle facilities where provide instead of the traffic lane?
Okay, good question. So the road rules currently state that a cyclist must use a bicycle facility where safe to do so. I've had a few examples actually of legal teams coming to us for advice about what does where safe to do so mean. Because if there was a shared path available, right? Let's say there's a shared path in a, let's also give a prize out for that one, Loretta, before I forget. That was a great question.
Will do. Thanks, Chris W.
If there's a shared path adjacent, say a 60 km/h arterial road, generally, I would say most cyclists would use the shared path because they would feel much more comfortable cycling within that space. However, we do have cyclists on our network who not only, categorize themselves as highly confident, but they're actually using the network to train. So it is part of their regime to ensure that they are riding at high speeds for long distances. Like that's what they want to do. That's what they want to get out of it. If that's their mission, I would not say it is safe to do so on a shared path. So I think that there is actually imperative for them to be traveling on the carriageway and fully acknowledge, no, it's not the safest thing for them to be doing, but they're not really trying to, achieve the goal, which is a shared path, which is just like a nice, safe, connected route away from traffic. They are, trying to be the fittest that they can be, and they're training. And yeah, anyway, so just to get into that legal space, I don't see there being a law that says you have to at all circumstances, because I just can't see that being enacted. The way that it's currently worded, it's where it is safe to do so, which is somewhat up to the decision of those cycling and other road users there. Good question, though. Really interesting. Back to my wayfinding signage. So this one is, just one example of a jurisdiction managing these things, but using blue signage there with the little bicycle symbol. So cyclists should be immediately identifying, okay, that one's for me, those signs there. And also the distances there, 5 kilometers, 8.3 kilometers, telling you key destinations that cyclists may be interested in. Another way that I've seen that managed is also Pines. So you can say it's a 10-minute cycle to Homebush Bay, or whatever it is. So yeah, just something, just one particular way that those signs are managed. Now, if you've ever had the privilege of cycling in, countries like Denmark or the Netherlands, they take this stuff really seriously. It's wayfinding. It's not an afterthought by any means. They really consider how cyclists experience their networks. Really, really common to have route numbering, as I suggested before. So the route number 2 would be, I know if I'm on route number 2, I'm going to get to the town centre. And you just need to look out for the number 2. That's all you need to think about. So you don't need to worry about translating things or anything like that. Luckily, numbers are universal, so we can just follow number 2. This is just another example of, all the different signs there to different destinations, different routes taking place, and then an overall map there as well, just to show where you are in space. Really awesome. I think it makes such a big difference to be able to provide things like that. So strongly encourage you, if you are developing any shared path networks in your jurisdictions, to have a think about how you're going to manage that kind of wayfinding aspect of it as well. All right. Shared path crossing shared paths. So this is another example where you may have, you know, large volumes of vulnerable road users potentially traveling in different directions. How do we manage the conflict point? This one, once again, takes me back to traffic engineering or road design. You can kind of see they've kind of just implemented a little splitter island here. This is actually back where Catherine used to live, out in Perth, just adjacent. I think it's West Perth Station or something like that. I haven't actually been here. I was shared this photo. Does this look familiar to you, Catherine?
Yes, it does. I don't think I've ever, I don't know if I ever used it. It's near the, I believe it's near the Royal Perth Hospital. I'm sure if there's any local WA people online, they can answer it better than myself.
Yeah, Philip has just said City West.
City West. There you go.
Right. I'll give Philip a prize. Good on you, Philip. That's
Thanks,
good geography. Super busy train station adjacent here. So you can kind of see the rail is just there. So what happens is cyclists may be traveling to the train station, but once these, you know, gates kind of open, you've got this flood of people also traveling and then up along the shared path here. So you've just got this massive hive of activity with cyclists and pedestrians all using that space. So how do we kind of manage that? Well, what's being used here is, you know, you can see lots of color. So they've used the green color here. They've used the splitter islands just so cyclists are aware there's something changing here. Also implemented the little give way symbol on the shared path itself, just to, you know, say that you've got to give way here. It's pretty cool. I've got to say, I don't have another example of this kind of treatment implemented. There might be another one along this trail here, actually, but it's good thinking, just applying those traffic engineering principles. You know, what kind of works for general traffic? Cyclists can, to an extent, be seen as just a smaller version of a vehicle, and they've got their own lanes and things like that. So theoretically, it should also work. So it's a really cool example of just trying to slow down cyclist speeds and ensure that they're giving way to pedestrians within that space. Loretta.
Oh, someone's just mentioned, should there be a zebra crossing to use more commonly understood road marking?
Yeah, great question. Let's give a prize out there too. And I was actually going to mention that. Another way that we could have potentially managed this example would be similar to how I was really emphasizing how good it is for raised crossing points where cyclists are crossing a carriageway. This is one where I think we could have done the same for pedestrians. So I might just, I've got too many little arrows and things going on here now. So we'll get rid of my scribbles. But if we had it would have been possible to investigate, you know, creating a raised table here with those zebra crossing markings as suggested across here. And then it's a little bit difficult to draw that, but this is like all ramped up. So cyclists are physically slowed down by that vertical deflection, by that grade of the ramp. And I think that's, as suggested in the comments there, it's a lot clearer there that, okay, I need to slow down. This is a pedestrian zone, or this is, I need to give way to pedestrians. I definitely agree with the sentiment that those zebra crossing markings are much more intuitive and well understood by the community, that that's not my space as a cyclist to just charge on through. I need to really slow down and manage my speed. So yeah, I agree with that suggestion. Another way that we can kind of see things managed in these locations is just by pavement markings. So where you do have pedestrians crossing over shared paths. Do I think that these add a significant benefit? Not really. I think it's seemed to be doing something. Often if you're riding on shared trails, shared paths, these kind of stencils, you know, they might be, I don't know, 450 mil square. By the time you see them, you could be already right on top of them. So it's not necessary that you could even read the text slow down. So I don't really see, those kind of pavement markings as offering a significant safety benefit. But in saying that, they are still, relatively common on shared paths where there are those conflict points with pedestrians. Catherine.
Just on that one again, Max, good point raised that with zebra line markings here in Victoria, and I believe in Australia, cyclists have to legally dismount. So that could potentially be problematic if that was used in this instance.
Okay. Yeah, so they're certainly not allowed to ride like in that direction. I actually don't know.
Yeah.
Might require someone with a bit more legal savvy than myself, but yeah, I certainly know parallel or in Victoria you are not allowed to ride across zebra crossings, but perpendicular. I don't think surely you wouldn't be expected to dismount, because think of a wombat crossing or something like that in like mid-block section.
Yeah.
It must only be parallel.
Yeah.
Good test though. Good test. Making me think on my feet.
Yeah, sure. I guess the other thing, I don't know if they've used it here, that they're just the rumble strips prior to the crossing point.
Yes. I actually might include that as an example in next module, just so we can have a bit of a chat about that, because it is worth mentioning that one as well. So I'll make a note to include that.
Thanks, Max.
Not a problem. That is the end of the module. We do have some time to go through the LMS, which I'll let Loretta get stuck into. But just wanted to finish on this little bit of a note where we are ending shared path designs. It's not really as simple as just putting up an end sign and saying, that's it, job's done. We need to be thinking about, the connectivity of the routes. Are we actually providing a sensible end destination? This is an example of one that is failing that. This is a real example. You can click on the link to have a look at the Google image if you're interested. The reason that it is likely ended here is because just adjacent this shared path here, there's just a massive multi-lane roundabout, like 3 lanes of traffic each leg of the roundabout, 60 or 70 kilometers per hour. Huge land envelope as well. And I could imagine that the shared path was stopped here because to try and get through that roundabout would have been pretty difficult to be able to design your way out of that. It would have to be some type of grade separation, I would suggest. So that's how this kind of shared path end kind of would have developed. But I think it's a really poor outcome, because invariably cyclists do still have a desire to cross here or continue their journey further up here, and just not providing for that whatsoever. So cyclists may enter that roundabout and just try their luck, which is obviously quite an uncomfortable thing to be suggesting. All right, I might hand over to Loretta and I'll let you share your screen and you can go through the LMS.
Thank you. All right, can everyone see my screen there, Max? Yep, you can see that. Great. Thank you. All right, so you would have all received an email with a link to the learning management system. Now, if you haven't checked your emails, I think Max mentioned it earlier, please check your junk or spam folders, because it often goes into those folders. If for any reason you cannot find it, that's fine. Please contact us, training@safesystems.com.au, or give us a call and we will reset it for you. Easy done. Or you could do it yourself. If you click here, actually, forgotten your username or password, Your username is simply your email address that you registered with, but you can click on there and reset your password easily as well. So I'll just log in and I'll show you around the system. So you come to the dashboard initially and you'll see how many courses you have been enrolled in or have completed already, because I know a lot of participants on this webinar today have already completed some courses with us. So just on here, I'll go to what we're doing today, of course, safe cycling infrastructure for streets and roads, and I'm going to view that course. And then it brings you to this page here. So the first, of course, is your welcome. And on here, you can find, again, the link to the webinar. So if, for instance, you know, on the day of the module, you can't find the link in your calendar or emails, you can just click in here and the link is there. Hopefully a few people have introduced themselves here. Yeah, I thought so. So just introducing yourself to your fellow participants. This is a really good one here. So the resources tab. So here you'll find a lot of different documents and things, I guess, that Max has referred to or will refer to throughout the course. So once you click on here, you'll have a list of different documents that you can reference. Just going back. Yep, so that's the resources there. Have a look through, have a read through. But most importantly, we mentioned earlier there is a quiz. So for today's presentation, you'll see here. So what Max presented today, you can actually view that presentation. The next really cool thing actually is the VR 360 degree video. So if you click on here, it brings up a video of Max. I won't play it, but once you click in there, you'll be able to see a 360 degree view of a cyclist, I should say. And then the quiz. So once you click on here, there is the quiz that you can attempt. So you get up to 3 attempts on the quiz. Pretty simple to just follow the prompts, attempt the quiz, and you just answer the questions as you go through. So that's module 1. So we will release each module as the module sort of comes up. So you'll see module 2 just before Thursday. Yeah, so that's pretty much all for module 1. So I guess just working through the modules as they come through. There are some assignments that we will run through as well. And then, of course, at the end, feedback and download your certificate. So that's the LMS. If you have any questions, need help with that, as I said, contact our team, our training team. But that's all from me, Max. Did you want to bring anything else up in here?
No, I think that's perfectly timed because we can leave the rest of this session. So we've got another 5 minutes left. If you wanted to watch that 360 degree video now, that means the start of module 2, we can just do a quick little exercise to see how everyone found cycling in some different environments. So thanks everyone for your feedback, your comments, your questions so far today. I'll just check, Catherine, is there anything I need to follow up with at the moment?
No, all good to go. Nicely
Wonderful.
done.
Well, enjoy the 360 degree video. We look forward to seeing you in module 2. Please log on a couple minutes early and we'll run some trivia where you're a chance to win some prizes as well. So look forward to catching up then. See you Thursday.
Thank you. See you then. Bye.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.